Good morning, animators. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about liquid and perspective because that's important. Perspective is so important. All right. So here are the forms that we were drawing on the surface of before. Now we're going to start drawing on the inside of these forms. And it's a baby step. You're going to be like, okay, if I can draw on the surface, I can draw a ring around it like this. Then it's just a matter of filling it in down here. I know that I'm super good at perspective or whatever. So we're going to fill up in this thing. And when you fill it up, of course, your surface ring just goes up like this. If you're drawing on this surface, I've gone ahead and mapped out kind of my halves and stuff, because when you're dealing with something in 3-point perspective, I guarantee the halfway is lower than you think. It just is. So it's easiest to just draw an X, map those things out. You know exactly where the halfway mark is. So let's say it's going to fill up real fast. We only have 6 drawings to do it. So then we know this is the very bottom of it. We know this is our halfway mark right here. That's 1/4. I believe that this lower one is this and like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drawings. We've done it. It's 10 frames long because we've mapped out the perspective. Say we need double that. What we can do is we find the center of each piece. We map that out. We can eyeball it once it gets close enough because we're having a good idea of how far things are apart. If you need to measure everything, measure everything. You will gain a more intuitive sense of perspective as you learn it more thoroughly. As you keep doing your studies, it's going to sink into the back of your brain. You're not going to need to map out every single one. Like, I know from experience now that my halfway is going to be much lower than I thought, but more often than not, I'll at least do quarters with some sort of measurement so that things are working well. I'm not going to just throw garbage at my screen and hope it works. I'm just going to measure it out, take that extra time to do the measurements. That way I know it's working. I'm not guessing and checking because I don't have time to do that. In my personal work, sometimes I'll just fudge it and hope for the best because I have the liberty to do so. I can go back and change as many times as I feel like I want to. I can just throw it in the garbage. But if I'm doing something for a studio, I'm just going to measure it so that it's right because I need it to be right. This goes for character animators too. I don't know how often I'll get a character drinking out of a glass. Ew, what a nice beverage, yes. And there's not enough liquid to reach their mouth. It's just that much liquid. And the character animators will do this and they'll spend all that time drawing that nice hand. And then it will not make sense. Like, I'll have to have the water fly out of the cup outside of, what gravity would allow. I'd have to have the water come up and out like this because they're pouring water and the glass is not upside down. For the liquid to come out of the glass has to be upside down. Why is this a problem? Happens all the time. For decades I've seen this where animators drink from a glass like this. Next time you're drinking, if you're a character animator, please go to a mirror and see how high you have to tip. Like, this is half full. So I can drink like that. If it's a glass, and if you can't see it, I don't care what you do if I don't have to draw the liquids. But if you're using a clear glass and it's almost empty, it's been established in a shot as this much liquid, you must tilt the glass to get the liquid out of the glass. The same thing goes for jugs or buckets or barrels. If your bucket only goes this high and I'm supposed to be putting out a fire, the water won't come out of the bucket because of gravity. The water will be in the bucket. It drives me crazy. Hopefully these were good tips because it's just me whining. So let's think about some other places where we use water. We have waterfalls. Boop-a-doop. And a waterfall will go into a pool like this. Maybe we have some nice rocks. Maybe we've got some little plants like this. But we need to think about the perspective of the scene to accomplish what we need it to do. So if we've got a waterfall like this, we can see the top here. It is important to recognize that. So our horizon line must be higher, at least this much higher. Let's say our vanishing point is here. So now when we're drawing these little surfacey ripple things, we need to consider the perspective of that water. So that water's coming along like this, and then it's going to hit our corner and start to fall over the corner like this. So this part here is going to come down first. This part here is going to come down here. And then it's going to flow down like this. And any kind of, whatever kind of style or decoration or detail is added on top of this is in addition to the importance of getting the perspective right of these ripples. When it hits the surface of the water, you want your ripples to all come from your impact point. So here, this is where the water is impacting the surface all along here. So our rings can come out steadily from that area. This seems very sensible, but we have to consider the perspective. We're now looking down quite a bit at the surface. So anything that's down here on the surface like this is going to be a down shot. We're looking down at this little pool. When you're designing something like this, if you had to design your own waterfall for a personal project, it's important to consider the scale of anything you're putting in there. So if you want to have your character in your scene, this guy's looking pretty smug with himself. Give him some buttons. So here we've got a nice little friend with broken feet. But we want to think about how big this is compared to this guy. Because now, if we look at it, we bring our human back into perspective. Our human would be this tall at waterfall height. Is that the size we want for our waterfall? If yes, fantastic. And if not, we need to change the scale of things until that it's working properly. Then we can consider the size of a splash. Okay, so if you just throw a random rock in here, the size of the rock will determine the splash. But if you have a waterfall impacting the surface of the water, the size of the splash should reflect the character's size when they're interacting with that background. So this is really important whenever you're designing any effect that will interact with a character. If you have a dust poof like this, and your dust poof's all the way up here, and it's a little scuff, it's not going to make sense that it flew this far. You want to keep your dust in this zone, this size. So it always helps to bring a character into whatever scene you're doing to make sure that the perspective works with the character's perspective, because in cutout, we're not changing the perspective like live action. In live action, we're going to look down at a character who's looking up all the time. We're going to go, but why? Because we can. 3D especially, they'll do this kind of stuff. They'll just be like, I can do it, so I will. And then you'll have a character looking down like this. Hello. Weird little arm. So if you're animating for 3D, then any dust coming up like this is going to have to be made for this scene. If you're doing 2D on a 3D character, something like that, that stuff needs to be changed. But usually in cutout, especially cheap cutout, that's my specialty, they have a character perspective. All of them are built kind of in the same area like this. So when you're building your splashes, you want to build your splash on the same perspective as the character, because most likely the background artists are going to be making things that make sense for the characters, or they have to change the character. So we're going to have, so if the character is going to the pool, say, the background artist will give a pool that makes sense for the character. So we've got your little ladder like this, and it's going to make sense for the character to walk over and jump in. If you start, when you're making these templates, and you set your splash to the same perspective as your character, it's very likely that your splash will work with the backgrounds, because any sensible team, the storyboard artists in the background, the layout people, know that the characters need to fit in there. They're going to be building their stuff in the perspective of the character, so you should too. And if it's something amorphous, if like a ball of fire that can be like scaled up or down in a completely arbitrary way, it's still best to make it in scale with the character when you're finished. If you want to draw it big, I like to draw big sometimes, then I'll reposition all drawings and I will shrink the thing down, the drawing layer, until it's in line with how big it should be with the character. You got to make sure any line work, if you're working on a line work show, that the line art makes sense with the character. Usually will either be a match the background effects, or it'll be a match the character effects. And sometimes it's either one depending on the scenario. So a fireball will need to match character effects. It will look like a prop, but a splash in a pool will have to match the background because it's part of the background. And being aware of the perspective of either of those things, making sure the line art and the scale make sense for those things, is going to make all of your reuse much more efficient and useful. If you have a splash that looks like this, we're looking down at a splash and all your characters are pretty close to front on, then you're going to have to redo this splash when you have a character interact with it. I mean, it's not useless. Maybe you'll use it at some point, but having everything match your character right up at the front end is going to help you a ton. So hopefully this ramble helps you somehow. Yeah, I didn't really have a plan coming in here, and it shows. So let's go back to this thing. If we're animating the surface going up, I've had this just sitting around waiting to be called. You're thinking about that 3D object like this. You've mapped out kind of the pace that you want along the side of your thing. And then you're drawing on the surface of forms again. You're just drawing on all 4 surfaces. And if you watch this here, this is a wave. It's just an animated wiggly line. So it's exactly the same thing as when you're animating your flag. You want your water to kind of loop up the side in a path like this, where like the wave is going across the screen, if that makes sense. And if you watch, it feels like cohesive liquid. You can have it boil. It depends on the style that you're going for, and you can add a lot of bloobly bloobs, bubbles that come off of it as it's like actually filling up like this. But I like to just have a wiggly line animating across the surface of the form. It feels very wave-like. It really is as simple as those surface animations that we did in a previous video, where you just animate your high point along the surface like this. As it goes along, it goes this way. Boop, 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 that peak. And then the valley comes along. Valley, 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 valley. And it just wraps around in perspective this way around your thing. Water will hold itself together pretty well. It'll like blah, 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 blah. So that'll make it feel watery, I find, is to have the water kind of flow around in a circle as it goes up the surface. For thicker liquids, you're going to have like pooling like this. Like honey doesn't bloop around. It just kind of fills up from the center out. It's going to go like this. And all of this stuff, you need to know the perspective, or it's just not going to work. The moral of the story is just perspective is important. That's all. I'm trying to edit this into something useful. Like, share, subscribe, all those things internet people ask you to do, and I will see you next week.